Welcome to Dialogue, a true crime conversation. I'm your host, Rebecca Sebastian, and I'm thrilled to be back after a brief winter hiatus. Thank you for your patience as I took a little time away from the podcast to focus on new episodes, map out the first season of the new year, which is actually Dialogue's 4th season. So this is exciting. We are in triple-digit numbers of interviews, and I'm excited for all that's ahead. Happy belated New Year. To kick off this season, I am speaking with Sam Walker, a British journalist who now lives and works in the United States, and we're talking about her new podcast, American Vigilante. Now, if her name or voice sound familiar to you, it's because she was a BBC anchor on their Live at 5 program for many, many years, and I just loved our conversation and discussing this wild podcast, which captures her conversations with a man who calls himself KC. KC steps in and works entirely outside of law enforcement to help people who are desperate for help. Take a listen to the trailer.
I'm a hunter. That's what I do.
When you are hunting somebody who by all intents and purposes is a monster, do you have to become a monster?
No, I just have to be able to think like a monster. I'm a monster hunter. Well, this is going to piss a lot of people off, it really is. But, I've never been a liar, and I ain't going to start now. Now, I don't give two fucking shits if you're a cop, or a guy like me, or anything. That kid now has no dad, that woman has no husband, that man was a United States Marine, and a good fucking man. That's bullshit, Sam. Our rules of engagement are pretty simple. If we have to pull a trigger on one person, they're all going to go. It's that simple. We couldn't have any slip-ups. We didn't have time to sit there and zip tie him and gift wrap him. He had to make sure that guard was never going to be a problem again. So we get to the first room, and the woman was in there, and she'd been hurt. And it was obvious that I had a gun in my hands. I said, "Follow me. Keep your mouth shut and do what I say." And all of a sudden, the door at the other end of the hallway flies open. And there is one of the biggest men I've ever seen in my life. And I'm like, holy shit. And he's got a knife in his hand. And I'm looking at him and I'm like, I'm peeking around the door and I'm like, holy God. Jeez, I don't want to be in the hallway with this guy. He's a freaking monster. He was a freaking moose. So I stepped around, I had my gun out. And he kind of looked at me, and I said, "I swear to God," I said, "if you do anything other than what I told you to do," I said, "I'm going to kill you right here."
Do you ever know what happened to him?
No, ma'am.
Has it ever crossed your mind since?
I think more about the turd I flushed down the toilet this morning. You got kids? You got kids, right?
Yeah.
Couple girls? So, one of your girls is taken, Sam. God forbid that ever happens. And you just happen to know me, or know how to get hold of me now. What are you going to tell me, Sam? What are you going to tell me when I show up to tell you I can get your daughter back? You want me to make sure I don't hurt anybody? What are you going to tell me, Sam? You about got tears in your eyes right now just thinking about that shit, don't you? Well, it's ugly. I can tell you this. There's no feeling in the world like putting a child back in the arms of its parents.
What on earth goes through your head when the gun is being pointed at you?
You want the truth?
Of course.
I'm going to kill you and eat your fucking heart. That's exactly what I think every time. No matter what happens to me in the next second, I'm going to kill you. So if I'm going to die, that son of a bitch is going to die too.
That's just a taste of what you'll hear in this podcast. I highly recommend you listen. And when you do, let me know what you think. Message me on Twitter or Instagram @DialoguePod, or drop me an email. My email address is in the show notes, and let me know. Do you think it's ever okay to do a really wrong thing for a really good reason? Should we take justice into our own hands when law enforcement fails us? Does vigilantism exist because of a failed system? Also, do we even believe what this guy KC is saying. Sam and I discuss all of the above and so much more. Enjoy this conversation, and thank you to Sam for killing the small talk and for being the first guest to answer the season's new closing question, which is kind of a tough one. Sam, welcome to Dialogue Podcast. I'm very excited to talk to you about your podcast, American Vigilante.
Thank you so much. Good to speak to you.
Likewise. So let's start with the concept of vigilante. I feel like we might think we know what that is. Our definitions might vary. So what do you say is a vigilante?
I mean, this is something I've thought about, as you can well imagine, for many, 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 many hours over the last 6 to 8 months or so. And I think it's such a complex question and such a complex discussion. We could talk about this for the next 3 weeks. And I think it's a very personal answer to that question. If you ask 20 different people, you will get 20 different responses. Some people think, of course, they are kind of moral fighters. They are fighting for the rights of the people who've been wronged. Other people think they are a scourge on society and that they are there and they disrupt the police and traditional law enforcement. But I would say, for me, it is about taking the law into your own hands. Is it something that is always right or wrong? I can't even begin to answer that question. And I think when we dive a bit deeper into the podcast, I think anyone who listens will be asking themselves all the questions that I asked myself over the last few months about how I really feel about what this man does.
Right. And that's a huge part of the journey for the listener on your podcast, is that not only are we learning about the wild stories that the main subject, Casey, is sharing with you, but we're also there for the ride you're on, which is this legit? Is this guy a fraud, a storyteller, a man with an imagination? And if this is true, like, how is this even possible? So you bring us in on that. And it's also a little unclear how he came to you and how this story happened. So you're a journalist from the UK. You find yourself in the US. Can you talk a little bit more about why and how you started working with this man, Casey?
Well, I was approached by somebody who knew Casey, and that person told me that this man was ready to tell his story. I think I was approached because, as you said, I was a radio presenter in the UK for a BBC national news station, BBC Radio 5 Live. And it was fairly common knowledge that I had moved to the United States, and I moved to the Wild West. You know, I'm here in Phoenix, Arizona. And funnily enough, I had been in the US less than a year when I had a kind of brush with the sort of person who Casey is. And I say a brush because it wasn't something that was completely in my life, but I found myself in a really horrible situation where I was threatened by a man we were renting a house off as a family. It turned out he was not a nice guy at all, and he threatened us in many different ways over a period of time. And in the end, we actually had to end up leaving the house. The police were involved because he'd been so threatening towards us. And here in Arizona, I'd say probably a few weeks after we'd left the house, and someone contacted me, a friend of a friend, and said, you know, what that man did to you was wrong. He's got all this rent from you. He's got all this money from you. He's never going to return the money he owes you. He's threatened you. He's frightened you. He's made you leave the place that you called your own home. What are you going to do about it? And I said, well, nothing. I need him out of my life. It's just too stressful and too painful. And they said, well, if you want, I know someone who could take him out into the desert. And I was like, what's that now? Excuse me?
Welcome to America.
Yeah, I'm just going to leave that there. But it is an option if you want to take that option. So this sort of sat and swirled in my head, and I thought, here I am from the suburbs of Manchester, a city in the north of England, and now this could open a very different door in my life. Needless to say, I did not take that person up. So when somebody, a completely different person, then contacted me and said, look, you're a journalist. They said, there's this person, he has been running a team of vigilantes for the last 20 plus years, and he's ready to talk. Do you want to talk to him? So my initial reaction wasn't, what a load of rubbish. That's nonsense. Of course he's not a vigilante. Having already had this brush of the knowing that this kind of other world was there. But then when I sat on a Zoom call with the person who calls himself Casey, and I still only know that as his name to this day. I don't know where he lives. He was sitting in a car on a very grainy mobile phone with his face covered when I first talked to him. And he told me a few of his stories, and he told me why he now wanted to tell his story to the world. And, you know, Rebecca, I just thought, this is wild. I need to know more. And not just as a journalist, but as a human, I want to know what on earth is going on here. I want to know more of his stories and get more under his skin. So that's really the reason why we started our more than 50 hours of conversations over last year.
Do you think vigilantism and the idea of an identity of a vigilante is uniquely American? I mean, it's interesting to me that your life and career in the UK all happened. You're in the United States less than a year and you have this encounter. Do you think we find it more here? Is it just the spirit of America supports that notion more?
It's almost like an American fantasy of retribution. Of you can't put us down. We may have been the victims here, but we're in America, and that means that we are going to get our justice. And I think there is definitely that sort of, as I said, that sort of fantasy of retribution. Look at the A-Team, for goodness sake. This is what I grew up on in the 80s, watching the A-Team. I will say there are vigilantes in the UK, and there was a case that I covered actually on the BBC a few years ago of paedophile hunters. So people who would go out and they would entrap paedophiles. They would pretend to be children online in order to entrap paedophiles, and then they would take them to the authorities. So I think the difference there is that they would take them to the authorities. And when you listen to the podcast, 99 times out of 100, the authorities are not involved at any point with what KC does. And this is something I challenged with KC so many times. And he was saying, I think there should be teams like mine in every state. And I went, a lot of people aren't too smart. And you are telling people to go and take the law into their hands and fight for what's right. People, let's look at the way the world is today. People will see an image online that's clearly been manipulated and take it as fact. People will see a document that's been clearly fabricated, say about COVID or about the election or about the president, and they go, look, this is what the White House just released. But people take stuff at face value. So I found it really frightening that he wanted this kind of team of people. He said, when we kicked your butts out of this country, he used to say to me, when we had, our revolution, we kicked you British lot out. There were farmers taking up with their pistols and their shotguns, and that's what people need to do today. And I'm like, wow. I find that really frightening. And of course, I have to mention guns. It is not in my culture. There are guns in England, of course they are. They tend to be used by farmers to keep pests away from their chickens. I lived in a city called Manchester, which got the nickname in the early 2000s as Gunchester, because there were some weapons on the streets and there was drug wars and there was, big problems in that city. But I can walk into a store here, as I did when I'd been here a few months, to go and buy a pair of hiking boots. And I stumbled into a complete hunting store and my mind was blown. Yeah. And I talked about this on my podcast. I saw these like little old men buying these huge semi-automatic weapons. And I was like, what are you using that for? But talking to some people, the argument is, well, for protection, because we can, because it's our right, it's in the Constitution. And as a British person who didn't grow up at all in that culture, I really struggle with that.
Sure. I mean, there are even Americans like myself who grew up not around guns for whom that feels very foreign as well. And I'm in a large city. I'm in New York City. The idea of people carrying terrifies me because we're so close together. You bring up an interesting idea of, the gaps in our law enforcement and criminal justice system. These are the places where I can start to say, okay, a family so desperate for justice or to recover a child, if they don't feel they're getting what they need from a police officer, detective, FBI, whoever, wouldn't you turn to anybody? Wouldn't you want KC to step in and make it happen? And that's really was I felt like his driving thesis with you was like, what if it was your kids? Wouldn't you want someone like me if push came to shove? And that's that tension you feel in the whole podcast of, is it ever okay to do these wrong things for the right reason? Well, so I guess I'll put that to you. Like, how challenging was that to have that pushback with him this whole way?
So from the outset, the thought of vigilante justice was pretty abhorrent to me. I was like, no, I I suppose I'm the view that in order for us to live in a civilized society, the state needs to have a monopoly on violence. If you've got people running around with guns, you've got people deciding what they think is right and wrong, as opposed to there being the state saying what is right and wrong. That to me is, you know, there be dragons, there lies chaos ahead. But you've hit the nail on the head. You start digging into this. I look at what happened to us, and okay, we lost a lot of money and we were scammed by somebody, and he was threatening. And, you know, I live in an open carry state in Arizona, and we received letters from this man where he said, you know, you've threatened my family. I need you to know. We hadn't threatened his family. It's ridiculous with these kind of quiet British people. He said, but, you know, he logged this letter, you know, and I need you to tell you that I open carry, and if I see you again, I will not hesitate to use deadly force against you to protect myself. And this was a man who had a key to where my children slept. So that's when I left the house. So I hope you've never felt actually frightened in your life. I'm very lucky. I got to my 40s before I felt actually frightened in my life. But as I was trying to pack my kids' things, knowing my friend was coming to take them away from there, it was really genuinely terrifying. That is the tiniest moment I've had. I cannot imagine my child being taken. I cannot imagine what thousands of families go through every single year, not just in the States, but elsewhere. So yeah, on paper, vigilante justice to me shouldn't be allowed. It's not that it shouldn't be allowed, it shouldn't be necessary.
Yes.
I would say let's get every single step we can before we need to get there. But actually, and this is what Casey always did, every time I tried to have, and I found this frustrating, every time I tried to have a sort of theoretical conversation with him, like, let's talk about state monopoly on violence, let's talk about the actual practical reasons. If everybody starts to act as a vigilante, what sort of nightmares that could be. And he's like, what if it's your kid? What if it's your kid? What if it's your kid? And you cannot argue when you're trying to have sort of an intellectual conversation. If someone's having an emotional response, you can't converse on that level, really.
And I think we also know from experience that a personal connection to anything that was previously theoretical or abstract is what will change your mind on something. Yeah. Right? I mean, talk to someone who's anti-LGBTQ rights, and then someone comes out in their own family. Hopefully, their reaction, maybe, you know, there's more consideration for that. Suddenly, there's someone they love for whom this will be an issue. So bringing the personal in does inform the more meta level. It's a really confusing spot to be in, but I think America is in the throes of this in more ways than one, and this is just one way we're seeing it.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's who gets to decide then. Because the thing about justice is that whether you believe criminals should have the right to a fair trial, right? Do you believe a criminal should have the right to a fair trial? Now, you might say, again, for a civilized society, that is absolutely necessary to say that, yes, this is what we need to do because we know about miscarriages of justice. If someone like Casey is deciding if someone's guilty or not, I can see a lot of problems there. But then Casey would argue, hey, and I'm not going to be as graphic as Casey was on many times during this podcast, but he said, if I walk in and I see a man abusing a child, he's guilty. Mm-hmm. Why go through the court system? Why go through the alleged victim, the alleged perpetrator? Why let him stand in the dock for, you know, and use all that taxpayers' money? This is what Casey would say. That guy's guilty. He's done something abhorrent. And it's almost as if, in his view, when somebody commits a crime, they lose all their human rights. They lose all of their human rights. And I suppose that is one of the deep questions I thought about, and listeners to the podcast would think about, is that right?
Right. Thank you to today's sponsor, Pair.com. If you have a business, you need a website. What's the best way to get a website up and running? Choose a website hosting company that makes it simple, like Pair Networks. Pair has over 20 years of experience managing the entire digital ecosystem for thousands of online businesses all around the world. Pair makes it easy for you with do-it-yourself website building tools and features, including simple drag-and-drop page design. And they have guaranteed US-based support technicians ready to help you whenever you need it. 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Right now, when you sign up with Pair Networks, you'll receive 1 free month of web hosting. See for yourself how easy it is to build your website for free. Visit pair.com/free to get your first month of website hosting for free by using the code QUICKSTART. That's pair.com/free, promo code QUICKSTART to get started today. That link will also be found in the show notes. Oh, that's a big one. I mean, we've explored a lot of the big themes that come up in true crime stories here, but that's a great question. I like to think you maintain and retain your human rights personally, but I'm not going to say it's an easy thing to think about when you think about children, especially if they're your own. But I'm curious about your role as a journalist and reporter and corroboration and verification, knowing that you'd really be unable to do it because he operates so outside of any law enforcement agencies. So you're really trusting him or skeptically accepting what he's saying. What was that like for you? And was that really different from other stories you've covered where you can verify facts? And how was that experience?
Like none other I've had before. That's the bottom line. I mean, it was how I had to approach this was to say, does it matter if he is 100% telling the truth? If he's 50% telling the truth? If he's 0% telling the truth? For me, this was about the big questions that we've just touched on there. Because we know people like Casey exist, right? Because things I will tell you is, number one, 3 weeks after him telling me a story, say, oh, do you know when you said in that story when you knocked the guy over? And he will be straight back into it. It's not like he'd have to go, oh, hang on, which story was that? Let me just check. You know, there was none of that. It was as if I'd said to you, oh, hey, Rebecca, your child's birthday party last year. You'd be like, oh, yeah, blah, blah. You know, you'd be straight back into it as if it happened to you. Another thing I point out in the podcast is that, yes, it seems very fantastical and very A-Team and very Taken and all these kind of, the Equalizer style, is the fact he's a great storyteller, does that make him less credible? If he was a worse storyteller, would you believe him more?
Yeah.
And so I had to make a decision. Okay, I can't verify this stuff because everything he's telling me is more than 7 years old because of the statute of limitations. He sometimes would tell me things and say, do not put that name in. Do not put that location in. I know later on that he purposefully changed locations in order to kind of so that things couldn't be Googled and kind of cross-referenced. So I had to approach it as, well, okay, I can't verify this, but then I'm not presenting this as true.
Right.
I am not saying to you, here we are, this is 100% truth, it's fact. At no point did I say any of this was fact. I've said, this is an experience I'm having as a mother, as a human, as a journalist, having conversations with this person who has a completely different worldview to me, a completely different life experience to me, and in the kind of 256 character world we live in, to be able to sit and talk to somebody for 50 plus hours, who wouldn't do that?
Absolutely.
And staying in the gray, which is so difficult to stay in the don't know. And months after we finish recording, I still don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, that's the big spoiler alert, I guess, listeners. Like, do listen to this podcast because you will still go on the ride and the journey. But like most of these conversations we have, you end up, so few things are that definitively black or white. So few things in the world, this included. There is a turning point where corroborate's not even the right word, but you do speak to one of the victims of one of these horrific kidnappings and abuse, and you speak to a woman called Dee Dee who talks about her memory of KC being one of the men who helped recover her. So is that a huge pivotal point in the story for you?
The hairs on the back of my arms are up just remembering that conversation. And you've talked about the fact I've been a journalist and a radio host for decades. I've talked to families who've lost kids. I've talked to parents who've been in, and humans who've been involved in tragedies, who've been involved in natural disasters, who've been through incredible hardships. It was part of my job as a news anchor to talk to people who'd had horrific experiences. I've only ever cried twice whilst interviewing someone. And Dee Dee's story, and the fact that as a grown woman, I could look at her, and she talked about not showing me her face, but she decided she was going to do that. And I've had a few people come to me and say, oh, she's pulling the wool over your eyes like he is. And these people who are so certain that they know the fact and the truths. But looking in that woman's eyes, even via a screen, and hearing her almost revert to being a 6 or 7-year-old child, but the way she described things when she was being held captive, she used childlike words and childlike phrases. And I don't know, I'm not a psychologist, but I saw her body language change when she was talking about those times. I heard the pitch of her voice change. And I mean, you heard my reaction to her interview. It took me to a place that it took a long time to shake off that feeling of just utter despair of what she had been through as a young girl. And that was deeply affecting, for sure.
I guess I have such a propensity to believe people. I start from a place of belief, I guess, and then do my own investigation or digging. But my instinct with her, I mean, if she's lying about that story, that's also tragic.
It is, and who is she? Who is this person? Because unless, again, he's found some incredible actress who is and she was in a regular looking room when I spoke to her. I mean, again, I was trying to think, well, okay, if he is faking, who is he?
Right. And who is she, and why would she do that? And that's got its own sad circumstances around it, that you would, for whatever reason, create this made up trauma that happened to you. I mean, that's sad. So I think we can kind of let that live and hear that. Among the stories he told, did you get a sense of a through line of who engages KC and who asks him for help?
I would say, I mean, the different work that he does, he obviously has done things like go and clear out drug houses in family neighborhoods, but he's also rescued executives who've been kidnapped. And I think there are different people in those circumstances. But when it comes to children who've been taken, it's really regular folk. We're not talking super rich people, perhaps don't have the wherewithal and the tools around them to really kind of push investigations forward. I mean, quite often when KC's called, it's because, a child's been missing 3 or 4 days and the police are still investigating the parents. Right. Or the parents are saying, why is nothing being done? It's been 3 days. Help, we need some more. But they don't know how to make that happen through regular kind of law enforcement channels. So, I mean, I obviously don't know who any of these people are. I haven't spoken to any of these people. And these cases, as I said, were all kind of more than 7 years ago. But he did talk about some communities, that kind of matriarchal communities that were kind of out in some of the southern states in the middle of nowhere, where they kind of set up a community and a town or a little collection of towns where they don't really bother with the outside world, and the outside world kind of doesn't bother with them. And if something happens within that community, they don't call the police, they deal with it themselves. We're not talking about 3 people and a dog living in a cabin out in the woods. We're talking about hundreds, if not thousands of people living within communities that aren't necessarily attached to a really big town or city. And I've got the feeling from some of the stories he told me that they're some of the people that have contacted him in the past, because it's all through word of mouth. It sounds so silly saying this out loud, but I can imagine if I went into that store that I talked about, the big kind of hunter, and it's people who were kind of the preppers, and there were lots of kind of stuff in there for living off grid. If I went in there and said help, I don't think it would take me too long to find someone who could help me, if I didn't already know KC. True.
There's such a diversity of lifestyle in the United States as well. I mean, like, there's so many different ways a community exists and operates in the world. I mean, there's gaps in our system in almost every ecosystem I can think of. And this vigilantism, it's what they rely on to fill that gap.
And what's interesting as well is, I'm a white woman talking to you, a white woman. And when the first couple of episodes was out. I was at a sort of podcasters meetup here in Phoenix, and an African-American guy sort of spotted me from across the room and made a beeline and went, "I've just started listening." And he said, "I'm from South Carolina." And I say, yes, thank goodness for this guy out there, because I'm never going to phone the police. The police are never going to help me. And I cannot speak for his experiences or for any other African-American person's experiences, of course. Relaying what he said, I was like, that, you know, I'm glad he said that to me, because this is something that I hadn't considered about what his community's experiences might be with, quote, traditional law enforcement, and the fact that he would look for alternative. I spoke to Karen Hunter from SiriusXM, and she said something very interesting. She was like, I know that he's a white guy because only a white guy could get away with what he's doing without the police coming down on him. Well, of course, Casey isn't a white man, but...
Well, that was an interesting revelation as well, because his identity as an American seems to transcend his identity as, it seems like, a Native American.
100%.
Right? Which really
Mexican.
is why I think this makes this so fascinating, because that supersedes cultural heritage.
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, that's a big piece of this.
Yeah.
I do recognize the privilege we both sit in. I do feel I have the benefit of doubt on my side if I were to call for help, if I were to have trouble and reach out to the police. In most cases, maybe sexual assault aside, I think women, you know, we do have some growth in that area of law enforcement to do. But I do feel like if I were being attacked or if a crime had been committed against me, I would be believed. Right. And I would be helped, probably given where I live, economic status, all of those things. Without that, I don't know, which is why I think this is so interesting.
This is exactly what I felt when I was threatened in my own home in 2020, and I called the police, and the police came and they believed me, and they waited with me for an hour while I packed up what I could to get out of that house and got my kids out. All I could think was, I'm this scared. What if they hadn't believed me? I can't even imagine what that emotion would have been like. But I said to Casey before, if I'd known you then, to have you come and stand at my front door, to know that something really bad wasn't going to happen to me, maybe I would have been able to sleep a little easier, you know?
Right.
But yeah.
I want to know, in what ways do you think this story is a true crime story at its core? And in what ways does this sort of transcend the genre?
I mean, I think it's true crime because, I mean, we are talking about things that have happened outside of the law. We're talking about people who've been kidnapped. We're talking about people who've been taken from their families. We're talking about people who've abused and harmed children and have got away with it in terms of the law not being able to apprehend them. And that's where he stepped in. I mean, just thinking about the idea of what is a victim, what is justice, and all these questions, what is morally right or wrong? I mean, you asked a question earlier where you said, in a way, do two wrongs make a right? You know, is there ever any justification of this behavior? And I always think of Dexter, the TV show Dexter, on that.
Perfect example, yeah.
He's a serial killer who is killing serial killers. So is he a good guy or a bad guy? And it's, you know, the reason that show's so popular and so great is there is no answer to that in a way. And I think it probably transcends that because there is this whole extra level. It is not telling a story of a crime that happened. It is then asking those bigger questions about, well, what is right and what is wrong? Should the state have a monopoly on violence? Should these vigilante groups be applauded and kind of viewed as heroes? Are they the pariahs of society? And again, I think 20 people could listen to this and have 20 different opinions. And that's what I love about it, though. In fact, it's been incredibly hard to go into this world and hear the things that I've heard. And as I said, there are questions that still remain unanswered for me. But it's been a real kind of experience of sitting in the don't know and going, you know, these days we're so forced. Are you pro-vax? Are you anti-vax? Do you believe COVID is a hoax? Do you believe it's a real thing? Do you believe the president is the president? Or do you think there was a big steal going on behind there? And people are like, you either believe that or you believe that, and there is nothing in between. And in fact, I think what this whole experience and this whole podcast series has done is said, I think we all know it isn't as simple as that. You know, is Casey a murderous vigilante who's also doing what's good for the world? Is he a complete fantasist? Or is he a great storyteller who's also telling the truth? You know, it's not black or white.
Right. Seems like there's a little opening at the end for you two to meet again someday. Are you open to meeting him physically at a real location in person?
Yeah, I'm only pausing because I'm just trying to imagine how wild that moment will be.
Oh my gosh.
How wild it will be. I mean, I do get messages daily from people saying, please tell me you're going to go and meet him. I don't know where he is right now. He wished me a Merry Christmas. He wished me a Happy New Year. I hope we do meet. I don't know how I'm going to feel about that.
Yeah.
I'm going to feel incredibly nervous, but I hope we do.
I kind of do too. But I also have hesitation and, you know, want you to be careful. And him.
Yeah.
He has to think about his, you know, well, he will. He'll figure it out, it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah.
At the close of every interview, I ask my guests the same closing question. And actually, you're the first person I'm asking this one to. This is for the new 2022 season. So I want to know in your own words, and we've even talked around it already, but how do you define true justice?
Yeah, well, again, how long have you got? And, you know, I'm not a moral philosopher, and moral philosophers have been debating this question, of course, for centuries. I think it goes, again, it kind of goes back to justice at a societal level is absolutely one thing. And we know that justice at a societal level is kind of equality and fairness and access, right? They're the kind of three tenets of justice at a societal level. But I think justice is such a deeply personal emotion. And it's difficult because I've already used the words emotion. And in fact, justice should be about the sort of method of the law. I think it's such a deeply personal feeling, which in a way is what makes things so difficult. And this is discussions I've had with KC. Why do you get to decide what justice is? Because what he does is absolutely deciding the fate of that person. And again, we're back to, this is a really difficult conversation that goes round and around and around.
I loved what you said. Yeah. I just like hearing a very personal point of view on it. I'm not asking for a, you know, definitive end of story answer. Just how did you feel about justice? And you answered that beautifully. Thanks for being brave. and thank you so much for being on Dialogue Podcasts. I encourage everyone to listen to American Vigilante. You will be intrigued and compelled by KC. You can make your opinions about him, and you give us so much leeway and latitude to do that. And I really loved how you set that up. So thank you so much for your work and for being on today.
Really nice to meet you. Thanks so much. Take care.
Likewise. Dialogue is a Yellow Tape Media production, audio engineered by Jason Usry and produced, hosted, and edited by me, Rebecca Sebastian. If you love the podcast, please consider becoming a diehard by signing up at patreon.com/dialogue. Other ways to support the show, follow along on social media. We are at Dialogue Pod across platforms, and you can now watch most episodes on YouTube by subscribing to my channel, Rebecca Sebastian. For more information or to drop me a note, visit RebeccaSebastian.com. Until next time, thank you for listening and killing the small talk.